Hello everybody and welcome to part 6 of this Tamiya Corolla build. In this video we're going to be building the body shell, getting that prepared and installed on the chassis that we built in a previous episode. Just following on with the decaling process, and for the eagle-eyed amongst you, just look out for a shifting plan half the way through. We'll come back to why that happened at the end of this sequence. So we'll crack on with the decaling with some music, which might give you a clue as to how we've changed direction with this build. Well, okay, who spotted the change in plan? Well, the Carpina decals were completely unusable. I tried to apply the main colour panels using that sheet and they were stiff. They wouldn't react to any solvents. The adhesive was poor. They were absolutely hopeless, perhaps the worst decals I've ever worked with. They certainly weren't going to work on this model. Added to that, the side panels with the RAC Rally umbrellas were inaccurate, so I just had to decide to junk those and use the kit decals instead, which were completely trouble-free. They laid down well, and as far as I can tell from reference photographs, they were accurate. So we pressed on with the kit decals from the Spanish Rally of Catalonia from that same year, 1998. So pressing on, we've got the window units masked up with the masking set from the kit. Just checking to make sure that they're in the right place when the window units are fitted into the car. Then they sprayed up and came out pretty well. Fit those in a bit. So going on to polishing the body shell, the decals are all applied, as you can see, and we've applied a couple of coats of 0 paints diamond finish 2-pack lacquer to the body shell. It's been just bits of grit that you're going to get in there, dust and so on. Just go on to polish those out with some 1200 wet and dry, which we're doing here. Very, very gently, just apply to the areas where there are specks of dust, and the wet and dry will bring those bits of dust out. Make sure that you do use water though. I use water with both the wet and dry and the compounds that I'm going to use subsequently. So very, very gently. You don't want to be burning through the varnish coats. So we're using some Tamiya compound. It comes in 3 stages. There's 3 elements to Tamiya's finishing products. Again, using a bit of water with the coarse compound to start with. Just a quick note the hardener that came in the 2-pack from Zero Paints. It was from Boy in the UK. It was a brand new set, and the hardener had already gone off. But a quick call through to Boy sorted that out. I had a new pack of hardener within a couple of days, so thanks to the guys at Boy for that, for putting that right. It's a problem I've never had before with the diamond finish 2-pack. So going on to the fine compound, just concentrating on the back wing at this point. The rest of the bodywork's being done, and we've got a nice finish on with the 2-pack. Very little grit in it, so not a lot of work needed. And as I say, you don't want to be overdoing this stage because you can quite easily burn through to the decals themselves, which you don't want. So we're going on with the finish compound now, which is very, very fine. And we'll finish off finely throughout the rest of the build with just some Tamiya modelling wax, just to give that final finish. Body shell came out really, really well. This is a complicated set of decals to apply. I think it's probably one of the most complicated schemes to do, particularly some of the large panels with the Castrol green and red on them, particularly around the back bumper, which is a very difficult set of decals to apply. There was inevitably gaps left with the decals wrapping around the bumper at the back quarter, but they were covered in the twin pack lacquer and then sanded back slightly once the decals had been protected with the lacquer, and touched through with some of Tamiya's Park Green, which is a perfect match for these decals. So that was just used to correct a slight error over the rear wheel arch where the two sets of decals join, and we managed to blend them in pretty well. So as you can see, they're quite a nice mirror finish across the body shell. It's a great result. So we're coming on to being ready for fit the window panels, which is quite a tricky operation, I suppose. There's a bit of a tip for how to do that safely without getting the windows damaged in any way. Just going to use a bit of the wax just to get a final polish on this body shell. Just checking round. There's one or two chips that need to be attended to, but there's some quite easy to mask and match those colours, as I say, with Park Green from Tamiya, and I think there's a bright red lacquer paint that I use for the red areas. So here's the modelling wax. Don't need a lot of this. And one thing about applying wax is not to polish it off straight away. I leave it to dry a little bit so it hardens into any scratches and so on that you might have on the body shell. If you wipe it off straight away when it's very liquid, it really doesn't do a lot of good. But as I say, if you just leave it to set in the paintwork and don't rub it off too much, then that's how you get That's how you get the sort of mirror finish that we're after on these car bodies. So very gently going round. The decals are very well protected at this point. You're not going to catch any of them really, except round on the very sharp edges. You might need to take a bit of care, but generally the ones that are lying flat on the body shell you are going to be protected by the top coat. So there's not much chance of lifting those. So just working round the bodywork, I'm just using a lint-free cloth at this point. Nice and soft. You don't want to be adding more scratches into the ones that you're trying to eliminate. But at this point, really, it's a case of getting rid of any grease spots and so on from the body shell. So working round. Another thing with these car body shells is not to apply too much pressure onto the roof panel. The A and B pillars on these cars are pretty thin, and it's very easy if you press too hard on the roof without supporting the roof panel. It's very easy to distort the A and B panels, which will cause problems later on when you're trying to fit the glass elements into the car. So we're coming on to fit the glazing now. There's the glazing all ready painted, masked, ready to go into the body shell itself. So we're just going to drop the glazing unit in, and we want to make sure that this is in exactly the right position so that we get the black border exactly positioned in the opening. So just laying it in and just attaching a few strips of masking tape just to locate temporarily, just to locate the windows in the correct position. Need to do just another check once this has been done, because obviously you can see it's moving around all the time. So get the tape on, position the unit, and then just tack the tape down to make sure that the part's in the right place. And to fix the glazing, we'll be using some canopy glue, which obviously is non-fogging. You don't want to be using anything that's going to potentially fog the clear glazing, so super glue's out for these parts of the construction. So start at the front, just a few dots. That's all it needs. This is very strong glue when it actually sets. So just some dabs at strategic points around the glazing unit. Some at the front as well. Don't want to be flooding this because the glue can seep through. It's a water-based glue and it can seep through onto the outside of the glazing, and it does clean up pretty well. As I say, it's water-based, so it does scrape off, but after all that polishing work, you don't want to be scratching and scraping glue off the polished surfaces of the body shell. So go easy on this stage. And I generally leave these units for 24 hours to set, just dropping the back window in here. We're moving on to applying a bit of panel line wash to the bodywork now, using panel line accent colour from Tamiya. This is a black one that also comes in grey, and I think there's a brown as well. I think black's okay for these cars. When you don't apply too much of it, it looks fairly accurate when it's dry. So it's just a case of working around the panels Back in the first video of this series, when we were preparing the body shell, we did work around all the panel lines with a scriber just to make sure they were properly even all the way around the model, and that helps at this stage. It makes sure that there's enough of a depression after painting for the wash to go into, but also makes sure that you get a fairly even line along there if you make sure it's scribed properly at the beginning. So just working round, the wash is thin enough that it just wicks through into those panel lines, just nice and gently. The more you put on, the more you're going to have to wipe off, so there's no point wasting it. That's plenty. You can see how it runs through fairly easily on the door shut line there. One thing I've seen quite a lot on watching videos on construction of these cars is, and on aircraft as well, is how a lot of people will apply these panel line washes and then wipe them off straight away. I think all that does really is, because the wash is still liquid, it just wicks up into the cloth that you're using to wipe it off with. So you end up wiping most of it away. The thing for me is that you've got to make sure that it's properly dry. It's an enamel paint. It doesn't take that long to dry. But once it is dry, you're not going to pull it out of the panel line with the cloth. In this case, I mean, you can use, because it's an enamel paint, you can use some white spirit, some little bit of white spirit on the cloth to wipe the excess off. In this case, I've just applied a tiny little bit of polish to get rid of the excess. If you manage to go too far, then you can always go back and apply a little bit more to make sure that the lines are nice and even. It's generally a good idea to go perpendicular across the panel line, so you're not going to drag anything out. There's obviously places where you can't do that. You can see how it's uneven on the bottom of the door there, so I eventually went in and cleaned that out completely. It just didn't look right with big splodges of black. So we're preparing the rest of the body shell now. We've got a little dummy engine panel to go under a mesh on the bonnet. So that just needs a little bit of detail painting. You don't have to go to town on this, but you can see enough of it through the mesh just to want to put a few details in there. So we're using some lacquer, Tamiya lacquer paint and some citadel blue there to pick out some of the details of the engine cylinder head itself in the silver and some of the pipework in the citadel blue. Citadel's great paint for brush painting. It goes on really well. It's got really good coverage. I use it a lot for a lot of the detail painting. So just working very carefully. It's worth spending a bit of time on these parts. As I say, you can see it through the mesh. So it's worth doing. I think the spark plug tops need picking out in red, so just a tiny little dot of red, which again just does show through. The mesh that we're going to be using, the kit does contain some plastic mesh, but we've used the Scale Motorsports steel set, which contains a full set of mesh parts. So they're going to be sprayed up. You can see the parts here, they're going to be sprayed up in black. and they just pop into place. Again, we're going to be using some canopy glue on that. So just position the part in place and just work around with a few dots of canopy glue. Just making sure you stay away from the mesh itself. You don't want to be blocking any of the mesh detail up, so just stay right on the edge. A few dots is enough to hold this part in place. And then of course the dummy engine unit just drops over the top of that. There's a mesh to go along there's a stone guard actually along the bottom of the radiator opening. And this is the main radiator mesh, I guess you can call it, with a template for the Denso logo to go on there. So there's the engine unit going in. At this stage, whenever you handle the model, I'm generally using gloves, either cotton gloves or latex gloves, and always placing the model down on a soft cloth. It's just so easy to pick up scratches. After all that hard work, you don't want to be scratching the bodywork. So there are all the meshes in place. You can just see the engine top popping through there. So there's just enough detail painting to be able to see that. So this is the rear view mirror. That's the kit part with some bare metal foil, chrome bare metal foil applied. Can use standard contactor glue for this part, plastic to plastic of course. Just one thing, it's a tiny detail really, but with rear view mirrors, just remember to position them as you would in a car. They're not actually straight. If you think about it, they're angled towards the driver, so just a tiny little detail that's worth reflecting. Just make sure it's positioned pointing towards the driver. So in this case, the left-hand side of the car. So we've got it wrong at that point. It needs to be moved over. I'll just drill in a couple of holes out for some aerial masts on the roof. Could have done these earlier, I suppose, before painting, but I didn't, and it's easy enough to just catch up with that now. Very slowly. I don't want to punch through the top of the paintwork just in case it rips through the lacquer as the drill emerges. So nice and gently, just make sure the drill does its job for you. Don't push through and apply any force. So they're ready for the aerial units from the kit. Finally, we're going to be just dropping the body shell on, ready for the next video, which is going to be the final details. There's a little bit of work to do at the front of the valance there with some carbon Kevlar, but you'll see at the end of the build how we caught up with that. So before we drop the body shell on for the final time, just make sure that we get rid of any dust and debris from the inside of the windows. So just using a bit of Tamiya wax to make sure they're properly cleaned up. Just working around. Don't want to be going mad with this stage. You can rub the edge of the. Bear in mind that these are painted, the black areas are painted from the inside, so we don't want to be rubbing that paint off. So just a quick wipe round, make sure that everything's clear from inside. It's not the end of the world if there is any dust or whatever gets in there. The body shell's not going to be fixed permanently, it just clips on, so if you do find that you've missed a bit, it can always come off. These are delicate models really. By the time you've got all the bits and pieces of aerials and bonnet pins and so on, you don't want to be messing about with them too much, so just try and get it right if you can first time and get rid of the dust, as much dust as you can. You just see there that we've painted the rear light clusters ready for the transparencies to be fitted, which we'll do in the last video of the series when we're finishing off all the detail bits. So there we are, that's the body shell in place. So that's obviously a major stage reached in the build. And in the next video, so video 7 in the series, which we'll be moving on to pretty quickly, we'll be just adding all the peripheral parts and finishing the model off. So if you want to pick up on that video, if you can subscribe to the channel, please do, and you'll be notified when that video, the final video of the series, is posted. It should be very, very quickly. Actually, as I'm preparing this video, the model is complete, and it's just a case of prepping that video and editing it. So that should follow on pretty quickly. So there we are for this video. As I said, we'll be back with part 7, finishing the project very shortly. In the meantime, thanks for watching this one. See you next time, hopefully. Bye-bye.